Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. For 7 years, I've driven tankers, chemicals, mostly the kind with names you can't say unless you've had a hazmat class. I don't normally haul through the Appalachians, but work was strange in 2020. Demand changed. Routes shifted. That week, I had an overnight run from Knoxville to Raleigh from dispatch, and my GPS routed me through some winding mountain roads close to Asheville. It was about 2:30 a.m. For what seemed like half an hour, I'd been climbing the same stretch of road. Steep, slow, with curves that make you check your mirrors twice. My eyes felt gritty. The coffee I'd stopped for earlier had worn off. About 20 minutes ago, heavy fog had rolled in, the thick type that your headlights just reflect off of. To help stay awake, I had the windows cracked a bit, letting in the cool mountain air. There wasn't even music on, just the scattered voices on the CB and the rhythm of the engine. On both sides, there was nothing but woods. No signs, no lights, just a piece of road that looked the same no matter how long you drove. I was in the middle of thinking about pulling over for a break when I saw her, right in the center of my lane, a woman, pale dress, long hair, not moving. I slammed on the brakes so hard that everything in my cab shook. My coffee cup in the console tipped over, my seatbelt locked against my chest, and the horn blared. She didn't flinch, didn't move, just stood there and stared. It wasn't like she was flagging me down with her arms out. They were just by her sides, like she had done her job and was now waiting for me to do mine. I was going maybe 25 mph up that hill, so I managed to stop in time, about 15 feet from her. The fog swirled around her legs. She was lit up by my headlights, but she had no reaction. No step back, no step forward, no blink. I leaned forward and checked my mirrors to make sure I was still in the middle of the lane. It felt like I might be imagining things. Maybe she wasn't actually there. So I honked the horn again. Still nothing. I cracked my door open, leaned out halfway and shouted, "Are you okay?" Not even a twitch, no reaction. Something in me finally kicked into gear then. I slammed the door, locked it, and grabbed my dash cam. The red light was blinking. It was recording. I looked up again, and she was gone. With my foot still on the brake, I sat there, trying to process if I had really seen what I thought I saw. I even replayed the dash cam footage. It showed my headlights, the road, and right when the truck came to a stop. Nothing. Just fog, no figure. I looked for a driveway she might have come from, or any pull-offs, but I saw nothing. Just the shoulder and trees. I let go of the brake and started driving again, slower this time. I couldn't see her anywhere. Not in the mirrors. Just the road, just fog. It didn't feel right to just continue driving. I thought about turning back, but what then? There was no way I was going to call 911 to report seeing a ghost with excellent posture. About 45 minutes later, to do a strap check, I pulled into a gravel turnout. It's a habit, particularly with hazmat loads. You need to be sure everything is tight, that nothing has shifted, and there are no strange leaks. There was enough room for me to back in, nose out, even though the fog was still thick. I climbed down with my flashlight and turned on the hazards. I began on the passenger side, checking the straps and wheels, until I heard it, a knock from the back of the trailer. Everything seemed fine. I paused. My light was focused on the side panel. I waited. Knock, knock, the same noise. 2 soft taps like knuckles against metal. With the light in front of me, I went around to the back. The trailer door was latched, but the bottom bolt seemed a little off. I reached out to test it. With almost no pressure, it swung open. Now these are heavy-duty trailers. That latch doesn't just work itself loose unless you fail to set it properly, which I know I did. I check it 3 times every time, especially with chemicals. My heart was pounding in my ears as I pulled the door open slightly. Inside there was nothing. No leaking drums, no damage, no one hiding, just the cargo. I shut it quickly, jiggling the bolts twice this time before locking them. Still holding the flashlight, I stepped back and scanned the trees on the other side of the road. That's when I saw something else on the ground. About 15 feet from my rear bumper, a faint line of footprints in the gravel, bare feet leading away, not to the trailer, but away from it, into the woods. I didn't even check my straps again. I got back into the cab and locked everything. I drove the rest of the way to Raleigh with no stops. I didn't sleep, didn't eat. I went straight to the back and checked the seal again when I arrived at the delivery site. Still locked. Nothing was out of place, as if whatever I thought occurred was all in my head. But I know what I saw. I know that door was latched, and I know those weren't my prints. I still have no idea what the hell that was. A driver at a truck stop later told me it might have been a hallucination, that with stress, fog, and no sleep, your mind can make you see all sorts of things. But hallucinations don't knock, they don't leave footprints, and they definitely don't stand in the middle of a road waiting for you to stop. This took place just west of Tucson on Highway 86 in early October of 2022. I remember it so clearly because I had just taken a load of steel supports to Ajo and was deadheading back. The sun had set, the roads were deserted, and the desert had cooled down enough to have the windows rolled halfway down. I'm 34. Before I started trucking, I spent 8 years in the army. That's probably why I noticed details that most people don't, and the details that night just weren't adding up. I was cruising along at about 60. For miles there was no traffic in sight, just the sound of the tires and me, not even a jackrabbit in my headlights. Then from out of nowhere, a dark SUV behind me lit up, high beams flashing red and blue lights. But no siren, I've been pulled over before, wait station stuff, random checks. The usual dot stuff. I know how a trooper's vehicle should look. This one was too clean. No push bumper, no decals, no spotlight, just a simple black SUV. It looked more like a rental car than a patrol vehicle. The lights were inside the windshield, not mounted on the roof. Even so, I slowed down, signaled right, found a wide dirt shoulder, and pulled the rig over. My stomach was already clenching. He got out very slowly, with a hand near his belt, but he had no uniform, no trooper hat, and no visible badge, just jeans and a navy windbreaker. He came up to the passenger side, which is strange right away. Unless traffic is really bad, most cops approach on the driver's side. I leaned over and cracked the window, keeping my hands visible. "Evening, driver, what are you hauling?" he asked. His voice was monotone. No ID, no greeting. "Nothing," I said. "Deadheading out of Ajo." He glanced up at the sleeper cab. "You have cameras in there?" That was the first major red flag. Police don't ask about cameras. Not in that way. He then asked, "How heavy was your load?" "Mind if I have a quick look inside?" "Do you have a badge number?" I asked. He paused, as if he hadn't expected that. Then he said, "It's just a routine check. You can step outside and we can go over the paperwork." I didn't move. I asked again, this time more firmly. "Let me see your credentials." He took a half step back, his hands still by his hip. I leaned towards my radio mic and pressed the button hard enough for him to hear it. "Breaker 9, I've got a possible impersonator on 86 westbound, mile marker 103, requesting confirmation." He took off the moment I said it. Not a word. He just turned and power walked back to his SUV. He jumped inside and sped off into the dark. No taillights, and I swear there was no license plate on the back. I waited for 5 or 10 minutes. Through dispatch, I eventually got a real trooper on the line. I gave them the best description I could. They sent an officer out, but by the time he arrived, the guy was long gone. No footage from any traffic cameras, nothing at nearby gas stations either. The desert has a way of swallowing things up. The very next day, I installed a dash cam. Nowadays, I won't stop for lights unless I can see a badge through the window. And if anyone tries the passenger side again, I'm not even cracking the window. I keep thinking about the questions he asked, about the cameras and the cargo. He wasn't trying to give me a ticket. He was looking for an opening. This incident occurred a few months back in March, when my sister and I were on our way to the airport for an incredibly early morning flight. Our flight to Orlando was set for 6 a.m. because we had plans to enjoy a few days at Universal Studios. To catch that flight, we hit the road somewhere between 3 and 3:30 a.m. It was one of those quiet drives where the world seems half asleep. The highway wasn't completely empty, but traffic was light, with most cars spaced far apart. At one point, we found ourselves behind a semi-truck. It was cruising at a decent speed, and my sister decided to just stay behind it rather than pass. She knows how much I dislike being right next to semis. I've always felt uneasy around them. My family has faced some close calls in the past, and I've heard far too many frightening stories about accidents with big rigs to feel comfortable next to one. So, for a while, I was okay hanging back behind the truck. For the first 20 minutes, everything seemed completely normal. The truck maintained the flow of traffic, neither speeding nor slowing down. It was just an ordinary drive. But then, out of nowhere, the driver began making some odd movements. He would abruptly tap the brakes for no discernible reason. Initially, I thought he might have seen something in the road or an animal, but the road ahead was entirely clear. The weather was calm, cloudy but not windy or rainy. Following that, the truck began drifting toward the next lane as if the driver wasn't paying attention. Then it would jerk back, straighten up, and do it again a little while later. That's when my sister eased off even more to give him ample space. Eventually, the situation reached a point where we were pretty distanced from other vehicles. It was just us and that large truck on a dark stretch of highway, which significantly raised my anxiety levels. Things escalated when the truck suddenly swerved enough to hit the rumble strips along the shoulder. The loud vibrations and flying debris from the edge of the pavement were enough to get me to speak up. I told my sister, "You need to pass him. This is getting too freaky." She immediately agreed and decided to quickly go around him to maintain some distance. She signaled, switched lanes, and accelerated. But the moment we pulled alongside the truck, everything flipped. The driver blared the horn so loudly that it made me jump, and then he began flashing his high beams straight into our car. Right after that, he slammed on the gas, clearly attempting to prevent us from getting ahead. My sister didn't back down. She pressed harder on the accelerator. That's when things took a sharp turn into terror. The truck began gradually drifting into our lane until we were forced to ride on the rumble strips to avoid being sideswiped. Finally, my sister floored it and we managed to speed ahead of the truck. For a brief moment, I thought it was over, but when she let off the gas and I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw that truck hurtling toward us. He was barreling down, trying to catch up. My sister slammed her foot back down on the gas. At last, we started gaining ground, and just when I thought my heart couldn't race any faster, we caught up to some other cars that had been ahead of us earlier. Being surrounded by more traffic provided a little buffer, and the truck driver couldn't pull the same aggressive maneuvers with other cars nearby. He remained behind the pack, and that was the last time we spotted him. Throughout the rest of the drive, I kept glancing over my shoulder just to be sure. To this day, I have no idea why that happened or what the driver's intentions were, but it certainly heightened my unease around semi-trucks even more than it already was. I have been driving trucks for an extended time now, and one significant lesson I've learned is that the road at night has its share of bizarre moments. This particular incident occurred while I was hauling up US 93 in Nevada, en route to Portland for a delivery. It was late, around 1:30 a.m., and I needed to take my mandatory 30-minute break. I spotted a wide pull-off area that appeared suitable for resting, so I parked, organized my logs, and quickly assembled a sandwich. While I was sitting there eating, I noticed a vehicle roll in behind me. Initially, I didn't think much of it. Plenty of drivers stop in random spots to take a break. However, something about this particular situation piqued my interest. I kept glancing in my mirrors while I munched, and that's when I saw a figure stepping out of the car. The headlights illuminated him as he walked toward my trailer. The person stopped at the back corner on the driver's side and appeared to be touching the side of my trailer, almost as if he were feeling it or rubbing something against it. That set off alarms in my head. I reached into my lockbox in the sleeper, got my pistol, loaded it, and tucked it into my waistband before climbing down from the cab. I approached the back with a flashlight in one hand and my other hand resting on the gun's grip. When I shined the light, I saw a strange-looking man with greasy shoulder-length hair and a bald patch on top. He wore a filthy off-white trench coat. Without a doubt, his hand was pressed against my trailer. I yelled for him to knock it off. He slowly looked up at me with a creepy little grin, as if he found the whole situation amusing, and then, without uttering a word, he began walking toward me. I backed up towards my cab, keeping my hand on the gun, but not drawing it. At that moment, I didn't feel compelled to shoot him, but I certainly wasn't about to let my guard down either. I climbed back into my truck, slammed the door, and locked it. The man stood directly at my door, staring straight at me through the glass, still wearing that same twisted grin. My heart raced, and all I could think was, "Break's over. It's time to get out of here." I began turning the key when the truck shook violently as though something slammed against it. I darted my gaze to the driver's side mirror. Nothing was there. Then I shifted over to the passenger side. That's when I noticed her. There was a face pressed right against my passenger window. A woman, or at least something that resembled one. Stringy grey hair, sunken eyes, and yellow teeth visible through an unnatural smile. She slowly tilted her head from side to side, fogging up the glass with her breath. It felt surreal. My stomach dropped, and for a moment, I froze as if I were trapped in a nightmare. Before I could react, the situation escalated. The man outside climbed onto my driver's side step and began licking my window. Slow, deliberate swipes with his tongue, like some deranged animal. Meanwhile, the woman pounded on the passenger window, smacking it repeatedly with her palm. Then the man began shouting, exclaiming things like, "Come on, open up! We're friendly. What have you got in there? Open the door, boy." At that point, the initial fear turned into an adrenaline rush. I pulled out my gun, and as soon as I raised it where they could see it, the woman vanished from sight as if she had never been there. The man just laughed maniacally, jumped up and down on my step, then flashed one final grin before tapping his finger against his nose. He hopped off and disappeared into the darkness. I didn't waste a moment. I fired up the engine and sped away as fast as the truck would allow, continuously checking my mirrors, but I never saw any headlights behind me. I've had a fair share of creepy moments out on the road, but nothing like that. I do not want to know what those two were planning. For a few years, I had been driving long-haul routes, mostly carrying refrigerated loads across different states. I was spending more time behind the wheel than anywhere else at that point in my life, but I didn't really mind. The steady hum of the engine and the endless stretches of road provided a rhythm I could live with. That night, I was hauling produce, heading east after a late drop-off. I remember it was a quiet night, with barely any traffic, just the far-off glow of a farmhouse light occasionally. The radio was on low, and I was sipping coffee that had already gone lukewarm, thinking about how many more hours I had before stopping at a rest area. Around midnight, the sky was heavy with clouds that blotted out the stars, and the road stretched ahead like an endless black ribbon. It was then that I noticed a set of lights in my mirror, red and blue, flashing faintly at first and then growing brighter. My first thought was that it was routine, maybe a taillight had gone out, or they were doing random checks. I eased off the gas, kept my truck steady, and pulled over onto the shoulder. The road was so empty that the only sounds were the hiss of my brakes and the crunch of gravel under the tires as I came to a stop. When I looked in the mirror again, the vehicle behind me seemed odd. It wasn't a cruiser, just a dark sedan with one of those dash-mounted light bars stuck against the windshield. No markings, no decals, nothing. The driver's door opened, and a man in dark clothing stepped out. He wore a cap pulled low, and a bulky jacket zipped up to his chin. No reflective vest, no badge catching the light. Nothing I'd expect from a trooper pulling someone over on a rural highway. My pulse quickened, and my grip on the steering wheel tightened. He walked right up to my door without any hesitation, moving with a kind of casual confidence, as if he'd done this 100 times. When he got to the cab, he tilted his head and knocked on the door with his knuckles. Through the glass, his voice came out muffled. "Step out of the vehicle." It wasn't a request. It was firm, almost practiced. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Every instinct I had told me this was not right. Real officers usually start by asking for paperwork and explaining the reason for the stop. This man offered nothing, just a command that did not feel safe. I kept my foot near the pedal, trying not to let him see the tension building in my face. I leaned slightly, pretending to grab something from the passenger seat while taking another quick look at him. His jacket seemed oversized, like it was meant to hide more than just his body. The way he stood close to the cab, with his shoulders squared, made it clear he wanted to control the situation. He repeated the same words, a little more sharply this time. "Step out of the truck now." My mouth went dry. Every warning I had ever heard about imposters on the road rushed back to me all at once. Instead of rolling down the window, I spoke through the glass, asking him to show me his badge or some form of identification. His reaction was instant. Irritation showed on his face. He shifted his weight and pressed one hand against the side of my door, leaning in closer as if trying to see inside. "Don't make this difficult," he muttered, his tone becoming harder, more threatening. My gut told me loud and clear, if I opened that door, I was not walking away from this safely. I flicked my eyes to the mirror, checking the road behind us. Still no traffic, no approaching backup lights, just the two of us stranded in the pool of my taillights and his fake siren's glow. I thumbed the lock button again just to hear the reassuring click, my other hand already moving the gear shift into place. He must have noticed because his voice rose sharper now, cutting through the night. "Open the door now." He wasn't even trying to sound like a cop anymore. It came out as a demand, almost desperate. That was the breaking point for me. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, the engine's roar tearing through the silence as the truck lurched forward. Gravel shot out from under my tires, and in the mirror I saw him stumble back, his outline shrinking in the red glow. The sedan's lights swerved as he scrambled towards it, but I was already pushing the rig back onto the highway. My heart pounded in my ears as I focused only on speed. The white lines blurred into streaks under my headlights. I kept driving, barely daring to look at my mirrors, half expecting those flashing lights to reappear at any moment. The road felt endless, with every mile stretching out longer than the last. My grip on the wheel was tight, my eyes scanning for any sign of life. Another truck, a gas station, anything. It took a good 10 minutes before I saw headlights coming from the other direction, and only then did the knot in my chest begin to loosen. Whoever that man was, he hadn't caught up. When I finally got to a truck stop about 30 miles down the road, I pulled in and parked under the brightest floodlights I could find. The lot was filled with rigs, and just seeing other drivers around gave me a rush of relief. I went inside, got a coffee, and tried to calm my nerves. The clerk behind the counter asked if I was okay because apparently I looked as pale as a ghost. I told him what had just happened, and his expression immediately darkened. He said he'd heard similar stories of people pretending to be cops on isolated highways, targeting drivers when they were most vulnerable. I called the state police from the payphone in the corner, not wanting to risk my cell signal cutting out. They asked for every detail. The car, the man, the stretch of road. The officer on the line didn't seem surprised. He just told me I had done the right thing by not getting out, and that they would send a patrol to check the area. That answer stuck with me because it confirmed this wasn't the first time. To this day, I still replay that moment when he stood outside my cab, insisting I get out. If I had opened that door, I don't know what would have happened, and honestly, I don't want to. All I can say is that after that night, I never trust flashing lights on a lonely road without double checking. I still drive, but I keep my doors locked, my instincts sharp, and my eyes wide open. Maybe I was lucky, or maybe just stubborn, but I got away. And that's the only reason I'm here to share this with you now. It was a February night in 2019. The run started like any other. I was in a 6-truck convoy, heading north to deliver fuel supplies for the Prudhoe Bay facilities. Clear skies were in the weather forecast, and in Alaska, that means you push hard, covering as much ground as you can before the next storm system rolls in. Since Fairbanks, we'd been rolling together. The usual chatter crackled over our CB radios. Complaints about the cold, jokes aimed at the rookie driver who kept on riding his brakes, and updates on the road conditions up ahead. The convoy's leader was Big Jim Morrison, a legend on these roads who'd been running the Dalton before it was even officially open to commercial traffic. Behind him was Sarah Chen, one of the few women tough enough to handle these routes on a regular basis. Rodriguez and his partner Kowalski came next in their matching rigs, followed by the nervous rookie, Danny something or other from Ohio, who took the job because the pay was too good to refuse. In my Peterbilt, I was bringing up the rear, a position I always preferred since it gave me a clear view of everyone in front. We were roughly 200 miles north of Fairbanks, somewhere around Gobbler's Knob, when the fog began rolling in. At first, just wisps were drifting across the road, the kind of ground fog that appears on warmer nights as the ice sublimates. But it thickened within minutes into something that felt unnatural, a dense grey wall that seemed to just swallow our headlights. The temperature on my dashboard display plunged 15 degrees in just as many seconds. Holy hell, Big Jim's voice came over the radio. Where did this soup come from? The weather service didn't call for any fog. Visibility is dropping fast up here. Sarah's voice crackled through the static. Maybe we should find a place to pull over and wait this out. But on that stretch of the Dalton, there's nowhere to pull over. It's just a narrow ribbon of ice and gravel cut through the wilderness, with steep drop-offs on one side and frozen tundra stretching to the horizon on the other. Your only option is to keep on moving and pray that your luck holds. The fog closed in entirely, turning the familiar highway into an alien landscape. My high beams just reflected back at me as if I were driving through cotton, and I had to slow down to 20 mph simply to stay on the road. The convoy began to spread out, with each driver fighting to keep visual contact with the truck ahead while staying in their lane. Can barely see your taillights. Jim, Rodriguez called out. Same here, I added. This stuff is thicker than pea soup. That's when the first strange thing happened. I was focused intently on keeping Danny's taillights in my sight, and then they just disappeared. Not gradually, like he had pulled ahead or gone around a corner. They simply vanished as if someone had flipped a switch. Danny, I called out over the radio. Danny, where'd you go? Static. I eased my foot off the accelerator, scanning the road ahead for any sign of the convoy. The fog pressed against my windshield almost like it was alive, swirling in patterns that were painful to look at. My headlights could penetrate maybe 10 feet before being completely swallowed. Big Jim, you copy? Nothing. Sarah? Rodriguez? The radio just hissed with empty static. I stopped my rig right in the middle of the road. Dangerous as hell, I know, but I had to get my bearings. I climbed down from the cab, and the silence hit me like a physical blow. On the Dalton, you can always hear something. The wind through the mountains, your engine cooling, the distant rumble of other trucks. But this was a complete, suffocating quiet that seemed to press in on my eardrums. The fog wasn't just thick, it was wrong. It moved with a purpose, swirling around me in spirals that defied the still air. When I shone my flashlight into it, the beam vanished after only a few feet. But I could swear I saw shapes moving just beyond its reach. Not trucks, something else entirely. I got back into my cab and started driving again, following what I hoped was still the road. My GPS indicated I was on the Dalton Highway, but the coordinates seemed to flicker and change. The odometer kept spinning, yet the mile markers I passed, when I could even see them, made no sense. I passed mile marker 47 3 times in 20 minutes. That's when I began hearing the engines. At first, I figured the others had just gotten their radios knocked out by the strange weather. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Diesel engines working hard, the whine of turbochargers, the rumble of big rigs pushing on through the night. They were behind me, keeping a steady distance. "Hey," I called into my radio. "That you guys back there? If you can hear me, flash your headlights." The engine sounds kept on, but no lights appeared in my mirrors. I tried changing my speed, slowing down then speeding up, but the sound remained constant, always the same distance behind me. It was like they were matching my every move without actually being there. I drove for what felt like hours, the fog never lifting, the phantom convoy always at my back. My fuel gauge dropped steadily, but my GPS said I hadn't moved more than a few miles. The road stretched on endlessly ahead, mile after identical mile, with no landmarks that I recognized. The engine sounds grew clearer as the night wore on. I could make out individual trucks. Big Jim's distinctive Caterpillar rumble, the high whine of Sarah's Detroit diesel, the synchronized hum of Rodriguez and Kowalski's matched Cummins engines. Even Danny's struggling Volvo was there, working much harder than it should have been. But when I stopped and rolled my window down, the sound stopped too, like someone had just hit a pause button. Dawn finally started to break around 6 a.m., and the fog gradually thinned out to reveal the familiar landscape of the Dalton Highway. I was exactly where I had started, at Gobbler's Knob, just sitting in the middle of the road as if I'd never moved at all. My odometer showed I'd driven over 300 miles, but I was in the exact same spot. The other trucks were gone. I called it in the moment I got cell coverage, and the search started immediately. They found Big Jim's rig 2 days later, parked perfectly at a truck stop in Coldfoot, but Jim was nowhere to be seen. Sarah's truck was found a week after that, abandoned on a side road with the engine still running. Her logbook was open to an entry that just read, "Following the lights home." Rodriguez and Kowalski's rigs were never found. Danny's truck turned up at the bottom of a ravine near Atigun Pass, but crash investigators said the damage pattern made no sense, like it had fallen straight down instead of rolling off the road. The official report blamed the sudden fog bank for the disappearances and suggested the drivers got disoriented and made fatal errors. But I know what I heard that night. Those engines running behind me in the fog, following me on a journey that led to nowhere. The other drivers weren't lost. They were somewhere else entirely, still driving through that endless fog, still trying to find their way home. I quit long-haul trucking after that and found a local job in Anchorage. But sometimes, on foggy nights, I can still hear those engines in the distance. And a part of me wonders if they're still out there on the Dalton Highway, driving through the fog, waiting for someone else to join their eternal convoy through the Alaska night. I'm Carl Hendris, and for 12 years, I've been running freight through Alaska. I've given hitchhikers a ride before. Hell, most of us have out here. It's an unwritten rule that you help people when you can because this wilderness doesn't forgive mistakes. But the thing I encountered on that March night in 2021 wasn't human, and it definitely wasn't looking for a ride to any place I could take it. I was southbound on the Richardson Highway, hauling mining equipment back to Anchorage after a Fairbanks delivery. It was a crystal clear night, the kind where the aurora paints green and purple sheets across the sky, and it was so cold my breath fogged up even inside the heated cab. My dashboard thermometer read -38, the kind of cold that will kill you in minutes if your truck happens to break down. I had been driving for about 6 hours straight, pushing through that lonesome stretch between Delta Junction and Glen Allen. That is some of the most isolated highway in North America, where you can drive for an hour and not see another soul. Just endless spruce forest on both sides, broken up occasionally by frozen lakes that reflect the stars like black mirrors. It was around 2 a.m. when I saw the figure. At first, it was just a dark shape up on the shoulder, about a quarter mile ahead, barely visible in the reach of my headlights. As I drew closer, I could make out the classic hitchhiker pose, someone standing with their thumb out, waiting for a ride. What struck me right away was how still they were. Most people trying to flag down a truck at that hour would be jumping around, waving their arms, doing something to draw attention. This figure just stood there, as motionless as a statue. I began to slow down, checking my mirrors for any traffic behind me. The highway was empty in both directions, which wasn't unusual for that time of night. As I got closer, I saw it was a man wearing what looked like an old parka, the kind with fur trim around the hood. He was tall, maybe 6'2" or 6'3", but something about his proportions seemed wrong. His arms hung too long at his sides, and his head was tilted at an angle that made my skin crawl. I was maybe 50 yards away when I hit my air brakes and began to pull over. That's when the figure turned to face me, and I got my first good look at what I had mistaken for a person. Where his face should have been, there was only shadow. Not darkness, but an actual absence of anything, like a hole had been cut in reality. The parka fluttered in a wind I couldn't feel, and I realized there was no breath coming from where his mouth should have been. No fog in that bitter cold. My truck was still rolling to a stop when the thing vanished. Not like it ran off or ducked behind something. It just ceased to exist, like someone had switched off a light. I sat there for a full minute with the engine idling, staring at the empty shoulder where it had been standing. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or the adrenaline. I should have put the truck back in gear and gotten the hell out of there. Any sensible person would have. But curiosity has killed more than just cats, and I found myself climbing down from my cab to investigate. The cold hit me like a sledgehammer, and I pulled my own parka tight as I walked over to where the figure had stood. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Even in that frigid air, there was an odor like stagnant water and old meat. Then I saw the footprints, or what I initially thought were footprints. They were impressions in the snow, all right, but they were wrong. Too long and too narrow, with what looked like claw marks at the front, and they were filled with ice that was black as obsidian, not the white or clear ice you would expect. The prints led from the tree line to where the figure had been standing. But here's the detail that made my blood run cold. They didn't stop there. They continued across the shoulder, over the highway, and directly under my truck. I followed them with my flashlight, and sure enough, there were more prints on the other side leading into the forest. But between where the figure had stood and where the prints continued, there was nothing. No prints under my truck, no sign that anything had passed beneath my trailer. I was standing there trying to make sense of it all when I heard the tapping. 3 sharp raps like knuckles on metal, coming from somewhere underneath my rig. I dropped to my knees and shone my light under the trailer, and that's when I nearly lost my mind. The thing was hanging there, suspended somehow from the undercarriage of my truck, its impossible face turned toward me. Those weren't clothes it was wearing. The parka was its skin, mottled and dark, with patches of what looked like frost or fungus growing on it. Its arms were indeed too long, ending in hands with too many joints and fingers that came to points like icicles. But it was the absence where its face should have been that froze me in place. It wasn't just dark. It was like looking into a deep well at midnight, a void that seemed to pull at something inside my chest. It tilted its head, that horrible wrong angle again, and it made a sound like wind blowing through broken glass. Then it started to move, not climbing down, but flowing like liquid shadow, pouring itself out from under my truck and reforming on the road next to me. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in sharp gasps that crystallized and fell like snow. The thing extended one of those awful hands toward me, not in a threatening way, but almost like it was asking for help. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, like an echo in an empty room. Cold, it said, and the word hung in the air between us, visible in the frigid night. So cold, I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran back to my cab, slammed the door, and gunned the engine. In my mirrors, I could see the thing standing in the middle of the highway, that terrible void of a face turned in my direction. As I pulled away, it raised one hand, not waving goodbye, but reaching out, like it was trying to grab onto something that was slipping away. I drove straight through to Anchorage without stopping for food, fuel, or rest. When I finally parked at the terminal and got down to inspect my truck, I found something that still gives me nightmares. Scratched into the metal of my trailer in letters 2 feet high were the words, "Thank you." The metal around the scratches was covered in that same black ice I had seen in the footprints. I filed a report with the company, but they just wrote it off as vandalism at one of my stops. The Alaska State Troopers were polite, but clearly thought I was either lying or suffering from highway hypnosis. But other drivers started to come forward after my story made the rounds at the truck stops. A dozen of them had seen the same figure over the years, always on that same stretch of the Richardson Highway, always on nights when the temperature dropped below -40. The strangest part is what happened to my truck after that encounter. For the rest of that winter, no matter how cold it got, my cab stayed warm, even when the engine was off. The fuel never gelled, the hydraulics never froze, and my engine turned over on the first try, even at 60 below. It was like something was protecting me from the cold. Something grateful for a moment of human kindness shown to a creature that existed in eternal winter. I retired from long-haul trucking 6 months later and moved to Phoenix, where the desert sun never reminds me of that frozen highway. But sometimes, on the coldest nights of the year, I wake up with frost on my bedroom windows and the smell of old meat in the air. And I wonder if somewhere on Alaska's Richardson Highway, that thing is still standing by the roadside with its thumb out, waiting for someone else to stop for a creature that's too cold to ever get warm. At a depot outside San Diego, I had just finished loading a shipment. Mostly brake drums and struts, auto parts, heavy stuff. The tie-downs were triple checked and the load was solid. I was aiming to push east to find a rest stop before midnight, and it was the last bit of daylight. I was already 2 hours behind schedule because the dispatcher was late again. On my way out, one of the guys at the depot joked, "Be careful when you hit the desert stretch near Barstow. After dark, weird things happen out there." I just gave him a thumbs up and kept going. That kind of talk doesn't get to me. I've been hauling long enough to have heard every urban legend from every lonely diner from Laredo to Portland. I don't ignore my rig though. The tire pressure warning light started blinking a few miles past Lucerne Valley. Rear driver side axle. It might have been nothing, or maybe a slow leak. I didn't want to risk it. Just before the road narrowed to one lane in each direction, I pulled over onto a wide gravel turnout. As far as you could see, there was nothing but red rock and scrub, no cars in sight. To let some air in, I rolled the window down halfway and threw on my flashers. The sky had already turned a deep red, but the desert was still radiating heat from the asphalt. When I saw movement in my side mirror, I was just about to get out and check the pressure. A guy was walking towards me, baseball cap, gloves, vest. It looked like he appeared from nowhere. I didn't move. Like we were old friends, he waved. "Saw the flashers," he said, a little too cheerfully. "Need a hand?" My window was still open halfway. "I'm good, just checking a sensor." He approached closer anyway. "I'm with roadside assistance. I do patrols through here some nights." That didn't add up. "No van, no ID, no markings." He had a rag in one hand and a tool roll on his hip, as if he were trying too hard to look the part. He pointed at my tire. "Mind hopping out real quick?" "I can have a look. Get you on the road faster." "No thanks," I said, firm but calm. He smiled again. Too friendly. "Are you sure you don't want to get stuck out here? After dark, there isn't much help this way." "I already called it in," I lied. "CHP is sending someone." There was a pause and then a nod, but his expression shifted like his act wasn't holding up. "That's good. You got someone on the way," he said, taking a step back. "Just trying to help." I watched in the mirror as he walked back into the desert at dusk, not to a car, but just off into the brush. I didn't move. Then I started my engine and carefully got back on the road. My hands were tight on the wheel. I didn't floor it. I just drove normally, but I was alert. The pressure light was still on. I didn't care. I would get to the next station and have someone I trust check it. I pulled into the repair bay when I finally reached a proper truck stop. Wiping his hands on a rag, a young guy named Danny came out. "Tire sensor flagged an issue," I said. "Mind having a quick look?" He went under the rig. He came back around less than 5 minutes later with 3 lug nuts in his hand. "These were just hanging on," he said. "Someone loosened them. Probably hoped the wheel would fly off once you got up to speed." That wasn't an accident. I just nodded, saying nothing. I let the silence speak. Danny retightened everything, checked the other wheels 3 times, and gave me a number to call if I needed help overnight. Back in my cab, I remembered something a friend told me once. Another woman trucker I met in Oregon a few years ago. She had said, "Don't get out if someone shows up too quickly after a breakdown. It doesn't matter how nice they are. In this business, there's no cavalry, just vultures who know where to find the weak spots." I used to think she was just being paranoid. Now, I think I'm paranoid too.